Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Bruce.
Thank you, Bill. My name is Bruce Jacken. I'm from the Lexington Veterans Association. And I'd like to welcome all of you as well as our fellow veterans watching via Zoom at the Edith Norris Rogers VA Hospital in Bedford. Please rise if you are able and join Jim Ramsey as he leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Jim. Before our presentation today, we have three public service announcements. The first is that we're going to have a 1-minute video from a Lexington High School club called Senior Craft. The club is aiming to interview seniors and collect that information, present it on their website as a history of, senior experiences in the Lexington area. So there's a sign-up sheet going around, and if you would, like to encourage you to sign up for it. You'll be contacted by a member of the Senior Craft Club, and they'll arrange to have the interview with you. Jim, I think you have the sign-up sheets, don't you? Maybe pass them out and so people can.
I'll do it, maybe so you can do it that way.
All right, okay, so let's have the video. It's 1 minute. Thank you.
Oh, hold on, sorry.
At school focused on trying to slice that they could.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. I'm just gonna plug it in.
The experiences of the elderly community will form an intergenerational connection. And we're excited to hear more about your stories. We host 1-hour-long interviews that are one-on-one conversation style and very casual. Anything you want to talk about or share is on the table. We are interested in what you want to say. We're hoping to shed light on veteran stories and sharing with our community. With your permission, we'll audio record the interview, and afterwards you will receive a transcript of the interview that you can keep or share with others. You'll also have the opportunity to share a story on our website, but it is completely optional. Yeah, over the past few years, we've been able to hear and learn from many people within our community. From learning about a traveling actress to lessons about gratitude, we've learned so much, and every lesson is valuable. And if you're interested, a sign-up sheet will be passed around. We'll be in contact with you very soon about the upcoming event. We hope you join us for this project.
So, a worthwhile project. We hope that you'll grab one of these sign-up sheets and put your contact information on it, and Senior Craft will get hold of you.
Pass it around.
All right, the second PSA we have is from Karen Tyler, the Veteran Services Director, who wanted us to remind you of the May 5th screening of In Waves and War. Is a documentary. It'll be held at the Bedford Town Hall. There are also handouts that were at the table, and there should be additional handouts in here with all the details. We're hoping that people will attend this. It's a very good documentary, and have an opportunity to learn more about service members who have been suffering from PTSD. So again, that's May 5th at noon at the Bedford Town Hall. And then public service announcement number 3 is that Now, I can't even think of public service announcement number three. It's the book signing. Richard will be signing books at the end of the presentation. They'll sign, you can also buy a copy of the book, and we will have a raffle, free raffle for 3 copies of the book. So, it's an exciting book, and we hope you'll take advantage of this opportunity to get a copy or also to win one in the raffle. All right. The presentation today is the American Revolution and the Fate of the World by Professor Richard Bell. Professor Bell is a tenured professor of history at the University of Maryland at College Park. He earned his Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Cambridge and earned a PhD in history from Harvard. He's published 4 books as well as numerous articles and book chapters. He is also the recipient of the National Endowment for the Art of the Arts in Public Scholar Award, as well as an award from Andrew Carnegie Fellowship. He lives in University Park with his wife and 2 daughters. He is currently on a national book tour, and we're very happy that he agreed to make a stop in Lexington and give his presentation here. He's received high praise for the book, and I'd like to close my introduction by reading what I think is a rather unique praise for the book. And this is from a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, Ilian Wu. She wrote, "This is American history as if from a bar stool, not a lecture podium. It's giddy, rollicking, and bold." Now, we don't have the beer, we don't have the bar stool, but we have Professor Bell. So please give me a warm welcome to Professor Bell.
Wow, that was a great introduction. Thank you, Bruce. Tough words to live up to here. We're just going to make a couple of tech adjustments, and then we're going to get right in. So we're going to flip as our slides here. We're doing some advanced digital work here for the folks on Zoom as well. So just give me a hot second to get that up and running. All right, there we go. All right, hold on. All right, I think folks here can hear my voice, see my face, see the screen. I hope people on Zoom, most of the same things as well. It's lovely to be here in person. Thanks to Bruce and Linda and all the people on the committee here at LexVets who brought me here. I've done a few LexVets Zoom presentations. Maybe I've seen you there, and I've always enjoyed them. But I've got to tell you, doing things in person, face to face, is always my preference. So thanks to everyone who invited me here. I'm going to talk about the themes of this brand new book, which I think is a good starting point for a conversation, national conversation, as we head in to July 2026, America 250. I'm going to talk for just under an hour maybe, and then see what comments and questions you guys might have. If my voice drops and you can't hear me, start waving at me and looking mad, and I'll start trying to talk even louder. So let's get going. After 258 days locked below decks, John Moseley was unsteady on his feet. The second or third person to stumble from the bowels of the ship onto this sun-baked shore near Botany Bay, John Moseley was also the first Black American to set foot anywhere in Australia, the newest outpost of Britain's global empire. The Eora, the Aboriginal community living around the rim of that great natural harbour, watched him closely. A tall, dark-skinned stranger at the head of a line of pale, blinking people, all dressed in ragged clothes. John Moseley's journey from the tobacco fields of Virginia to the tidal flats of what would soon become known as New South Wales, Australia, had been a globe-spanning odyssey, more than a decade in the making. The 17-year-old had bolted from his enslaver at the start of the Patriot Uprising in 1775 and had thrown in his lot with the British King's cause. He fought alongside redcoat regiments in several counter-insurgency campaigns in the Chesapeake in 1776, hoping that Britain would guarantee his liberty from slavery when its mighty military inevitably won this great war. Well, those dreams of his started to slip away, of course, when the American rebels and their international allies eventually started to beat back the British. Mosley had to hustle to escape being captured and re-enslaved. By managing to make himself indispensable to his British military bosses, he succeeded in persuading them to let him leave revolutionary America at war's end in 1783. And this was a big deal because it was in brazen defiance of the fugitive slave clause of the Global Peace Treaty that diplomats in Paris had drafted only months earlier. So John Mosley arrived in London after the American War, but without work or prospects and ineligible for poor relief or a veteran's pension. Desperate hunger drove him to desperate action, and he was caught forging a form to claim a missing sailor's unclaimed wages. Mosley had rationalized the fraud as a necessary survival strategy and as a victimless crime, but the judge at his trial at London's Old Bailey disagreed and sentenced him to 14 years of hard labor in the British colonies. Now, this is after the Revolution. Back before the Revolutionary War, Britain had dispatched most of its convicts to serve out their terms of hard labor in Maryland and Virginia. 50,000 British convicts went to Maryland and Virginia in the decades before the Revolution. I've lived in Maryland for 25 years. I can tell you with absolute certainty, we have chosen to forget that in Maryland. But this is after the war. And independence, of course, had put a stop to those convict shipments to Maryland and Virginia. So guards shoved John Mosley onto a small ship scheduled to sail to a new penal colony on the other side of the world. He would spend more than a decade as a convict field hand in Eastern Australia, using a machete to hack long, coarse grass to feed cattle and blunting axe after axe to clear trees to make way for rough-hewn huts and houses. In 1800, Mosley received a conditional pardon after years and years of good, exemplary behavior. A full quarter century after escaping from slavery in Virginia, John Mosley was finally a free man, a settler, a founder, even. He put down his tools and abandoned agricultural labor as quickly as he possibly could. He took a job in a small merchant house in the fledgling Sydney township, and once he found his feet, he launched his own business, proud to be working for himself at long last and not for anybody else. The many journeys of John Mosley remind us that the American Revolutionary War set much of the world in motion. Convoys of Navy ships, cargo vessels, and even prison transports snaked across almost every ocean on this planet. They were all part and parcel of an unprecedented migrant crisis caused by the American War that sent great flows of people, soldiers and sailors, refugees and asylum seekers and migrants alike, out towards uncertain futures in alien lands. John Mosley's Odyssey reminds us too that what began as a quarrel over taxes and tea and indigenous lands metastasized into a truly global war. And it reminds us that the familiar events that took place right here in the 13 rebel colonies between 1775 and 1783 were intimately connected to far less familiar events and experiences occurring much further afield. It doesn't get much further away from Massachusetts than Australia, right? If you've never met me before, in person or on Zoom, you've probably noticed something about my voice by now, that I may not be originally from Maryland, right? You'd be right about that. Growing up outside London, as I did in the 1990s, I learned absolutely nothing about any of this. So the kind of budget Hogwarts school that I went to as a little British schoolboy in short trousers. Would you like to see my school? There it is. I'm next to Hermione Granger in the fourth row there. But the kind of budget Hogwarts school I attended as a British schoolboy, history was British history, and British history began with the Tudor royal family. As my first history teacher told us, and my first history teacher was the soccer coach, which is not always a great sign, it was thanks to King Henry VIII and Queen Elizabeth I that England saved the entire world by defeating quote unquote evil Catholic France and Spain's evil Spanish Armada that even defeated the evil Catholic Pope himself. Do you notice a pattern in these lessons I was given as a kid, right? And then from there, and this is absolutely true, we leapt over the next 4 centuries of empire, colonialism, slavery, revolution in America to arrive abruptly, yet triumphantly, at World War II. That's how we did it. Tuesday, it was the Tudors. Wednesday, it's Winston Churchill. That's how it was. Because, of course, World War II was the British national curriculum's equivalent of comfort food. Britain supposedly standing alone, plucky and defiant, saving the world once again, this time from the Nazis, without any help from any other country. That's what the soccer coach told me, so that's what I wrote down for the exam, right? Now, I am hoping you have noticed some key omissions in that educational curriculum. And those omissions, I know you've noticed. They're deliberate. The creation of national myths always is. To linger on the American Revolution would have been to dwell on British defeat and humiliation and loss. Who wants to teach their school kids that their country once fought a war against farmers and shopkeepers and managed to lose? And yet somehow the American Revolution managed to reach across the Atlantic Ocean and find me. And honestly, when it did, it changed my life. I'd gone to Cambridge University to study medieval European history. Think of peasants and popes and plagues and cathedrals and fun stuff like that. I soon exhausted every medieval European history course offering that a stubbornly monolingual English undergraduate like me could really handle. The English are not known for their command of European languages. When we go on vacation to France, we just speak louder and wave our arms until we're understood, right? So if I wanted to graduate on time, I needed a few more college credits. I needed a few more classes in some other field, preferably classes that did not meet before about, 11 a.m., something like that. That would be great. And that's honestly how I ended up stumbling into a class on colonial and revolutionary America taught by the woman on the right here, Professor Betty Wood. At the time, Cambridge University had and still has the largest history department in Europe, 70 history professors. Of those 70, she was one of just 3 who taught American history. Wow, indeed. And I was lucky to find her. What I found in her classes was a revelation. Dr. Wood was a working class British northerner. Some of you know that the north of Britain is the poor part of Britain. She was a working class British northerner with terrible taste in soccer teams, by the way, who had become one of the most formidable historians of her generation. I met her in the 90s, but she came up in the 70s. Imagine being a female academic from a poor background, from the wrong part of England, with the wrong accent, making it to Cambridge University. Think what she had to struggle to get where she was. And she was brilliant and biting and really funny, which I really liked. And she made the history of colonial and revolutionary America enthralling and seismically important. And I've dedicated this new book to her, to Betty. And her classes got me thinking, and they got me reading. Quite frankly, I was hooked. Within about a year of meeting Betty Wood, I'd abandoned the study of medieval Europe, and I had embraced the swamps and battlefields and plantations of the Atlantic world instead. And I'd set off for graduate school here in the United States, a little school outside Boston that begins with H that some of you may have heard of. And honestly, that was a decision that changed my life. I didn't realize just how much at the time. I thought I would go to Harvard, get a graduate degree, jump right back on the boat, go back to Britain, and find a job in a British university teaching British kids about American history. And it dawned on me over the next 7 years I was getting that degree that was a fantasy, because British people don't care about the American history. It turns out it's Americans that care a lot about American history. So I realized belatedly that what I'd actually done by going to graduate school here, I'd booked myself a one-way ticket. And I'm now an immigrant to this country. America's been really good to me, I should point out, but I didn't know that was the monumental decision I was making at the time. But after I completed my PhD here in Massachusetts, after I got married to a very muscular middle school teacher from Missouri, after I became a proud naturalized US citizen, another really proud day in my life, and after I began to teach American history to American college students at the University of Maryland, where I work now, I made a startling discovery. We here in America, we have our own collective amnesia about the revolution. Now, we definitely don't forget it here, especially in Massachusetts, of course, right? How many of you saw the Ken Burns thing before Christmas, right? You didn't forget it. You spent 12 hours reliving it. But oftentimes, when we think about the revolution here in America, we remember it selectively. We might cherish it, parade it. I'm thinking Patriots Day. We might even costume ourselves in it now and then, right? A little bit of dress up here and there. But we often crop it like a family portrait in which only George Washington here and a handful of other founding fathers usually make the cut. Despite the Herculean efforts of our K-12 teachers, American pop culture has taught many of us a shrunken and sanitized version of the American Revolution that boils down to 3 scenes, and 3 only. Jefferson writes the Declaration. Washington crosses the Delaware, standing like that on a moving vehicle. You'll fall in the river if you try it, I guarantee. And then Lord Cornwallis sees that and immediately surrenders at Yorktown 4 years later. Now, there's one foreigner. There's a Frenchman, the Marquis de Lafayette, who might make a brief cameo in this mythical story, as he does in the Hamilton musical, but the rest of the world is usually left out of the frame. Studying the American Revolution in a bit more depth reveals that this narrowing of the narrative I'm describing is itself a part of an important global story. You see, by the time the ink was dry on the Treaty of Paris in 1783 that ended the war, the clear victors, the newly minted Americans, were already retelling the revolution as a self-contained morality play, as simply the colonists versus the crown. Basically, David versus Goliath, an old song, an underdog story. The messy global reality of that war, that France bankrolled much of it, that Spain fought to recover territory lost to Britain, that native people and enslaved people were both actors and victims, was inconvenient for the new project of national myth-making after 1783. The young nations boosters back then understandably needed to reduce the chaos of the international conflict that had just ended into a neat and tidy origin story of plucky colonists triumphing over tyranny all by themselves. This is a bit like British school kids being told that Britain fights World War II on its own. We both know that's not the full truth. When American historians and artists first began describing and depicting the American Revolution 250 years ago, they gave short shrift to its many foreign entanglements. They preferred instead a much simpler story in which homegrown heroes faced down all the king's horses and all the king's men, all on their own. And the British, eager to move on, did not argue. The problem with myths, though, is that they stick. Myths are sticky, sticky things. Generations of Americans have grown up with a revolution stripped of its entanglements, reduced to a few undeniably heroic, yet I think overly simplistic set pieces. And the result is that our revolution appears less as part of world history than as an exception to it, a story apart rather than a story among. I think that the truth is much more complicated and much more interesting than the myth. The revolution was, from beginning to end, a global struggle. It upended lives from Boston, Massachusetts to Botany Bay, Australia, from Philadelphia to Prussia, from New York to Nassau and Nicaragua, from Charleston to Cape Town and Cape Verde. The war here in America provoked a father in one of the German states to take a hatchet to his eldest son's trigger finger to make sure his beloved boy could not be conscripted into the army that his German ruler had just rented out to King George. The war in America, and I'm about to show a violent image for 10 seconds. The war in America led a descendant of the Incas to be brutally drawn and quartered by Spanish troops in Peru for daring to stage his own independence movement. The war in America led dock workers in China to dump thousands of chests of British East India Company opioids into the Pearl River in intentional homage to the Boston Tea Party. The evidence of this being a truly worldwide war is everywhere once we start to look, and often that evidence is hiding in plain sight under our noses. I see that evidence in the overlooked statue of Bernardo de Galvez, the great Spanish victor at the Battle of Pensacola, now mouldering away in a forlorn DC park. No one in DC has any idea who that is or why he's there. I see that evidence of this being a worldwide war in a storefront museum in Nova Scotia, where a friend and I recently stood listening to a descendant of Black asylum seekers recount his ancestors' journey, recount his ancestors' journey from slavery in America to refuge in Canada, and then onward for some of them to new lives in West Africa after the war. And I hear that global evidence in the questions of high school students I taught in Taipei, Taiwan last January, who wanted to know all about how the British East India Company's tea trading in Guangzhou brought on the famous Boston Tea Party in the first place. Of course, none of this would be news to the patriots if they were standing right next to me. Their leaders understood the global reach and global resonance of their great struggle for liberty from its very beginning. Benjamin Franklin, in particular, worked tirelessly over those 8 years to kindle a civil war within the British Empire, thank you, into an unpredictable worldwide blaze. In 1776 alone, to take 1 year of the war at random, Franklin trekked up to Canada to try to persuade the Quebecois to rise up against British rule. Franklin drafted a German language handbill to try to provoke Hessian desertions from the king's ranks. And he set out famously across the dangerous Atlantic Ocean to try to secure military alliances with France and Spain and the Netherlands. And he was over there a while. Over the 90 months Franklin spent in Europe, he would continue to widen the American war in any way he could think of. He hired Irish sailors to raid British merchant shipping. The Irish were only too happy to help him. He toasted the victories of George III's enemies across Asia, and he recruited a Prussian drill master. Do some of you know who I'm referring to there? Loudly, 10 points for Gryffindor over there, right? He recruited a Prussian drill master to rush to Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, to try to whip the Continental Army into shape. Franklin was also responsible for engineering the global peace settlement signed in Paris in 1783. That extraordinary treaty document, a document as important to this nation's founding as the Declaration and the Constitution, that extraordinary treaty document not only ended the war and secured the independence of these United States, it also authorized this new nation to push back the Spanish Empire's encroachments into the Great Lakes region and to seize huge territories from native peoples. That treaty redrew almost every boundary line in North America, and it succeeded in pushing Franklin's own fledgling republic's western border 1,000 miles into the heart of this continent. As many of you know, British America under colonial rule ends at the Proclamation Line, ends at the Appalachians, about 200 miles inland, a narrow strip of settlement on the East Coast. It will be the Treaty of Paris that means the US rises at the Mississippi. That's why it's a big deal. Even the Declaration of Independence anticipated that the fight for America's future would be the work of many hands in many different lands. On July 4th, 1776, an Irish immigrant in Philadelphia worked late into the night to set the final text of Jefferson's Declaration into type on a printing press. It looked like this. John Dunlap was born in County Tyrone, in what is today Northern Ireland, and he had a contract to print all of Congress's official documents. By the following morning, he printed nearly 200 identical copies on large sheets of Dutch paper, destined for distribution across North America and around the Atlantic world. And of those 200, we think about 27 are known to survive today. And each one of those Dunlap declarations, those printed versions, is worth $8 million. Not bad for a kid from County Tyrone, right? And everywhere those Dunlap declarations, those printed versions went, they announced their grand purpose. They informed the international community that 13 British colonies had formed a new political union that was now eager to join what Jefferson called the powers of the earth. And this was not a simple courtesy notification. The delegates in Congress knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that they would need hard cash and generous credit from deep-pocketed trading partners, as well as more boots on the ground, and above all, massive naval support, if they wanted to have a hope of pushing the British back into the sea once and for all. And that's all they talked about in Congress the spring and summer of 1776. In fact, in April of 1776, Richard Henry Lee, the Virginian who first proposed a vote on separate nationhood, on independence, reminded his colleagues in Congress that no state in Europe will either make a treaty with us or trade with us for so long as we still consider ourselves to be subjects of Great Britain. Lee was convinced that a global declaration of the patriots' sincere ambitions for independence was the only means by which precious foreign alliances can actually be obtained. Seen in this slightly unfamiliar light, the document that John Dunlap printed so many copies of on the night of July the 4th was, from the Patriots' perspective, a declaration of international interdependence. We need your help. This is why those delegates translated it into multiple languages immediately and sent copies addressed to King Louis of France and King Carlos of Spain on the first ships bound for Europe on Monday morning, July the 8th. It explains why John Adams drew up talking points for negotiations with both those nations within 10 days. It explains why Congress dispatched their best man, Ben Franklin, to Paris that fall. Those printed proclamations of intention and invitation reached Spain, Austria, and the Dutch Republic by the end of August 76, and then France, Denmark, Poland, Switzerland, and the Italian states a few weeks later. It would take Franklin and his fellow envoys many months of lobbying to persuade Europe's great powers to sign public, official terms of military alliance. However, Franklin and his team of rivals quickly secured covert support in the form of money and supplies. As a result, the Continental Army soon received much needed shipments of muskets and gunpowder sourced from arsenals in the French Caribbean and the Dutch Caribbean, as well as massive loans to pay soldiers' wages from donors in Spanish Cuba. And that, by the way, is the origin of our currency, the dollar. It's based on the Spanish dollar as of 1776. And the men and boys in George Washington's army who benefited from this bounty of foreign assistance were themselves strikingly pluralistic and polyglot. The Continental Army's senior ranks boasted essential volunteer officers from as far afield as Eastern Europe and South America. Many rank and file enlistees were also recent immigrants, and patriot regiments hummed with a wonderful cacophony of different tongues, different accents, and different dialects throughout the war. Among the Continental Army soldiers taken prisoner at one 1776 battle, for instance, 89 out of 200 patriots told their captors they'd been born overseas, almost half. I think that's notable. King George's own coalition was no less multinational, multicultural, multilingual. Warriors from more than a dozen native nations helped the Redcoats engage rebel forces. as did perhaps 25,000 black fugitives from slavery, like John Mosley. 19,000 resident white loyalists also supplemented British troops, as did at least 8,000 reluctant Irishmen, and more than 30,000 soldiers loaned to the king by princes in 6 different German states. We call them the Hessians because one of those 6 states was Hessen-Cassel. I'll just point out you're looking at an interesting array of images here. The middle one, the one of the Hessian warrior, might strike you as a little bit different than the others. It looks a bit cartoony. Look at his shoulders, for instance. Those are not actual human shoulders, right? That's because this middle image of a fearsome Hessian is from a very popular 21st century video game where the Hessians are the enemies. It's called Assassin's Creed. Anyway, tells you something about cultural memory, that they're still the bad guys in our video games today, right? When coupled with the Royal Navy's initially uncontested command of the seas, all of this manpower was enough to provide the British cause in America with a critical early advantage. Indeed, one of General George Washington's greatest achievements, one that can be very easy to miss and minimize, was simply to avoid being cornered and forced to capitulate to these intimidating legions in the war's early, vulnerable years. I honestly think a lesser commander would have folded right away, but George did not. And George Washington's wartime correspondence makes clear that he understood that the Patriots' most pressing priority was to divert British soldiers and sailors away from the American battlefronts and tangle them up in costly, distracting operations almost anywhere else around the globe. Leaders in Congress agreed, and they sent out armadas of Patriot privateers to do just that. Those rebel-sponsored pirates, all 52,000 of them, plundered British merchant shipping around the Atlantic Rim and forced the Royal Navy to redeploy its expensive, lethal warships to convoy duty, escorting British merchant vessels, which of course is a really stupid use of a powerful battleship. That's the privateer's achievement, to make them do that. Of course, the Patriots' real breakthrough came in 1778 and 79. That's when the grand fleets of France and Spain finally joined this contest. They set about turning all of the world's oceans into battlefields, not just the Atlantic. Spain pushed the conflict into the Gulf of Mexico, the Mediterranean Sea, even the English Channel. The French Navy went on the offensive against Britain almost anywhere else around the world there was water, as far as I can tell. And you can see what a difference that makes by looking at this table. This is just ships of the line. As any Navy person in the room may know, ships of the line are the big ships of the 18th century. It may be an exaggeration, but think of aircraft carriers as a modern example, right? The biggest ships. Britain has loads of them, and it keeps building more. That's why they're the #1 Navy in the world. The USA, the Patriots, the rebels, do not have any big ships. No disrespect to John Paul Jones. He's trying the best he can, but they do not yet have any ships of the line. They're so hard to build and so expensive, the US won't build the first ship of the line until 1820. So the rebels don't have the naval firepower to match the Royal Navy. So it matters a great deal in 1778 when France, the #2 Navy in the world, joins the war on the Patriot side. But what really matters is what happens the following year, where the rebels and France are joined by Spain, who have the 3rd largest navy in the world. Because what happens when you add together the rebels and France and Spain? Suddenly there's a new #1 Navy in the world, and it is no longer the Royal Navy. Think about what this means out there in the world during the war. In the Caribbean, for instance, the French Navy sweeps in, and French admirals set their sights on the conquest of British sugar islands like Jamaica, the diamonds in King George's glittering imperial crown. We shouldn't underestimate just how valuable the Caribbean colonies were. I teach at Maryland, and I often get questions from students who say, so was Maryland the most important British colony? And I have to tell them gently that Maryland's not even in the top 20 most important British colonies. And sadly, Massachusetts wouldn't be much further above. If I give you the top 3 most economically valuable British colonies in the New World, and feel free to write this down. Number 1, Jamaica. Number 2, Jamaica. Number 3, Jamaica, in that order, by the way. So now France is after those. Well, why are they so valuable? Because planting sugar is like planting money trees. It's just planting money in the ground and making money. So as a direct result of France sweeping into the Caribbean, Britain has to reassign regiments from tours of duty here in North America to go and garrison those vulnerable Caribbean treasure houses. British commanders even have to abandon Philadelphia, the biggest prize the Redcoats have taken in the war so far, so they can go and garrison Jamaica. Over on the other side of the world, in India, French strategists aligned with George Washington succeeded in forging a pivotal new anti-British alliance with this man, Hyder Ali, the Muslim ruler of the Kingdom of Mysore. In 1780, Hyder Ali dispatched no less than 80,000 of his troops to try to seize a British stronghold in Madras. That is 10 times more than the troops Washington would have at his command at Yorktown. 80,000 is a lot of soldiers. It matters who they are pointed at during this war. No wonder that patriots in Philadelphia would later name one of their ships in honor of Hyder Ali. As this brief survey suggests, the Patriots' great success in drawing foreign partners into this war was essential to achieving American independence. In fact, I would argue that it was the cornerstone of Patriot strategy from Washington on down from the very beginning of the war. Britain lost not only because of George Washington's tenacity, which should never be underestimated, but also because the King's men had to stage long sieges, wage desperate naval battles, and take mounting casualties on too many other fronts, spread too far apart from one another. Leaders in London directed the fortunes of 100,000 troops during the war's climactic final stages. Yet those soldiers and those sailors were made to stretch across a vast global canvas, leaving less than 3 out of 10 of them, 30%, to try to rout the insurgents here in North America. That is the success of Patriot strategy. Still, there was nothing inevitable about the outcome of the American Revolutionary War. In truth, the Patriots' path to victory was a near decade-long slog. If you saw the Ken Burns show, you know what I mean, right? A decade-long slog characterized by a string of very strange bedfellows and strained alliances and dramatic reversals. No one back then knew who was going to win. No one back then even knew what was going to happen next. That fundamental uncertainty forced both sides to wage slash and burn propaganda campaigns to try to sow doubt and sow disinformation among their various enemies. Britain's loyalist supporters in America, for instance, tried repeatedly to weaponize their fellow American colonists' reflexive fear of foreigners. The loyalists spread ugly and untrue rumors that arriving French Catholic soldiers, you can see them being caricatured here, had orders to persecute American Protestants, to seize their lands for King Louis of France, and even ban the speaking of English here in New England. None of that was true, but it was great propaganda. For their part, patriots like Samuel Adams and Paul Revere each worked hard to persuade Irishmen, Hessians, natives, and former slaves like John Mosley to defect to George Washington's side. Meanwhile, over in Britain, a surprisingly vibrant anti-war movement there brought on motion after motion in Parliament to cease fire and lay down arms. And if any of those motions had secured a majority of votes, who knows? World history might look very different today. You might all be speaking English still. I don't know. From the first shots fired right here at Lexington and Concord in 1775, to the last cannon blasts at Cuddalore in southern India in 1783, the American Revolution broke boundaries and crossed borders. Indeed, the decisive role played by international allies like France and Spain and Mysore is really only a small part of this truly sprawling story. While the United States rose from the wreckage of this war to take its place as the youngest member of the family of nations, many other communities caught up in it had to fight far longer, and I think far harder, to find their own footing in that brave new world created by the war. For enslaved Black people, the revolution was a fierce struggle to stage the largest exodus out of human bondage since biblical times. For indigenous people, the war marked a dangerous turning point, stirring famine, spurring a massive refugee crisis, dramatically accelerating white settlement into the West, and permanently transforming the balance of power in the heart of this continent. None of these men, women, and children were spectators to America's great struggle for liberty. They were essential stakeholders, and the stakes were enormous. Indeed, American independence was nothing less than a geopolitical earthquake. Declaring independence was an event of such power, force, magnitude that Thomas Jefferson, writing 50 years later, described it as an instrument pregnant with the fate of the entire world. Within the British Empire, for instance, the war's many shocks and aftershocks demonstrated that the king's hold over his overseas subjects was neither permanent nor invincible. That revelation prodded insurgents in British possessions from Ireland to West Africa to take to the streets to assert their own ambitions for economic and political autonomy. American independence also cut the number of enslaved people under Britain's flag by 500,000, thanks to the loss of South Carolina and Virginia and Maryland. And that served to knock the pro-slavery lobby in London off balance and dramatically reduced its political power there. Anti-slavery activists in London saw that and sprang into action, leveraging this wholly unanticipated development to accelerate the rise of an organized campaign to free the slaves across the British Empire after 1783. American independence makes that campaign more likely, more feasible, more powerful. The Patriots' dreams of liberty ricocheted around much of the rest of the planet too, pushing questions about human dignity, popular sovereignty, and citizenship towards the top of the global agenda for the first time, and equipping rights seekers everywhere with a potent new vocabulary to advance their own causes. Of course, the Patriots' fight for self-determination did not break the grip of every entrenched political hierarchy. It would be incredibly naive of me to assume that it did. In fact, in some places, the American war produced decidedly counter-revolutionary consequences. In the Spanish Empire, for example, senior ministers there responded to events in British America with an authoritarian crackdown to try to bolster their own tenuous imperial control. That's why Spanish troops are ripping apart that Inca insurgent limb from limb. Nor did the rebellion in America bring on the abrupt collapse of Britain's global empire. King George surrendered 13 of his mainland colonies to the newly United States, which was certainly humiliating. There's no getting around it. But he managed to hold tight to more commercially valuable possessions elsewhere, including all three of the top three most valuable British colonies, Jamaica, Jamaica, and Jamaica. Having just offloaded its 13 most troublesome properties, the British Empire emerged from the chaos of the American War arguably stronger, but certainly much more ambitious than ever before. 60,000 loyalist asylum seekers displaced by the American War, then fanned out to other British colonies in the aftermath. And their arrival helped to tighten the reins of royal rule over British Canada, over the British Caribbean, and over British India, and then extend the king's dominions further into Asia, Africa, and as you see here, Australia. This is the British flag going up in Australia in 1788. My brand new book, The American Revolution and the Fate of the World, which you now know is a quote I stole from Thomas Jefferson, traces the path of this great war outward from its familiar epicenters like Lexington and Concord to all these corners of the earth I've mentioned today, and many more as well. In fact, the publishers at Penguin do not like it if I tell audiences everything that happens in this book. They would like you to take a look, as would I. So I promised them I'd always keep all the good stuff back. But I will say here, and this is true, you have not heard the half of it this morning. For those who've read the book, you know this is a wild story with many crazy twists and turns. It's a brand new history that aims to broaden and complicate a conflict too often perceived only as a narrow domestic drama, while also advancing 7 big arguments for smart readers like you to chew over. First, the argument that the revolution stirred the mass migration and circulation of enormous numbers of people across a swirling, sweeping stage. Think of John Mosley's Odyssey as one example. Second, the argument that the war was not an inevitable march to patriot victory, as we sometimes assume today, but instead the highly contingent result of improbable choices and last-minute improvisations. Third, the argument that maritime power was an important key to military success in this great age of sail, and that what happened at sea was often just as important as what was happening on land. Fourth, the argument that the government's soldiers and civilians who wrestled for global advantage often acted on the understanding that trade was power, just as much as territory was power. Fifth, the argument that the human cost of this 8-year war was catastrophic for many of those caught up in its tides. War is always hell. The American Revolutionary War is not some magically bloodless exception to that rule. Sixth, the Patriots' struggle for self-determination stirred imperial authorities like these 3 kings to increase oversight and increase security over their remaining colonial subjects. And seventh, despite that this was a conflict in which the call for liberty rang around this planet as never before. These 7 unheralded themes come into clear focus when we frame the American Revolutionary War in transnational terms. However, this worldwide conflict was fought and felt on a human scale. And I think that its impact is best understood today through the close scrutiny of individual people like you and me and their wartime experiences. So my new book is centered on the lives of about a dozen or so key characters. 5 of them get their own chapters. You already met John Mosley. In the book, you'll also meet Molly Brant, the Iroquois or Haudenosaunee woman who fought to preserve a fragile alliance between the Iroquois and the British Crown. Extraordinary person. You'll meet one of my favorite people in the book, someone I hope you recognize, Baron Steuben, or Baron Steuben, as we say here, right? Baron Steuben, the flamboyant Prussian mercenary who worked to Europeanize George Washington's American army. You'll meet William Russell. I really wanted to call him Bill Russell in the book, but sports fans got confused. You'll meet William Russell, the Boston school teacher turned privateer, who is taken hostage at sea and thrown into a black hole detention site 3,000 miles from his loved ones. You'll meet Harry Washington, the black man who escaped slavery at Mount Vernon and later declared his own independence against British rule in West Africa. An extraordinary individual. Someone should make a movie about him. And you'll meet the most fashionable person in my book, Peggy Shippen. That hairstyle is 5 foot high, by the way. You'll meet Peggy Shippen, the wig-wearing Philadelphia debutante, whose decision to persuade her new husband, Benedict Arnold, to switch sides led them to leave revolutionary America in hopes of starting over again in Asia, of all places. As we here in the US barrel towards our 250th anniversary this July, it might be tempting to return to the familiar rebels versus redcoats script that we all know and love. But I think we should try to resist that impulse if we can. Because to recover the wider history of America's founding fight is to tell not only a truer, but a much richer and more compelling story. It will mean asking the cherished sons of liberty to share history's great stage with enslaved Black Americans like John Mosley and indigenous women like Molly Brant, who each saw this war as their best chance for freedom. It'll mean setting our signers of the Declaration of Independence alongside Chinese tea pickers, Sierra Leonean separatists, Inca kings, German deserters, Irish privateers, French sailors, Spanish blanket weavers, loyalist war widows, British pacifists, Muslim rulers, and Jamaican washerwomen. In short, the great opportunity we have before us as we stand out on the precipice of this extraordinary and important anniversary is to imagine America's founding struggle in post-exceptional terms, as part of a global convulsion, and as one of the central creation stories, not just in the making of this great nation, but in the making of our modern world. Thanks very much. Indeed. I believe I have a very overqualified assistant here who's going to run a mic around the room. So if you have a comment or a question, raise your hand. Linda will come to you.
We want to do the
Okay.
raffle drawing first.
Oh, I'm hearing raffle drawing first, Linda. Apologies.
The Q&A.
Yeah.
So we have 3 books. Trish has the books and Luana has the numbers. So Elizabeth, would you pull the number? disqualify you if you pick here.
That's okay.
55118.
255118.
Check your ticket. Money.
Anybody? 255158.
One, one, eight.
All right, 118. Okay, let's, anybody? Let's go on to the next one.
Call it Debbie. Call it Debbie.
Yeah,
Call the first ticket. Yeah.
the first ticket's dead.
Okay. 255116.
Winner, winner, chicken dinner. There we go. Excellent. I'll come and sign the book for you if you'd like a signature in it.
Many.
Graham. Thank you. Well done.
You don't have to have it, he'll sign it, after the Q and A.
Thank you. I hope you like it.
Here, thank you. 255101.
101. 255101.
Another winner.
Rich, here we are.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, you're 103?
I'm one of two.
Oh, you're one.
Either one before me, after me, but she was.
No, 101. 101.
You had one
No, it's
one
here.
and 102.
Here.
Yeah. Somebody else.
If somebody else has it, they have
Jim
it.
has.
No, he's
Okay, Jim has. He
Okay,
has
last one,
102.
last one. 255082. 082. Right here,
Aha.
Lorraine.
Very good, Lorraine.
Okay, now we can go to the Q and A.
Can I have one around or not?
Congratulations to all the competitors. All right, who would like to be the first
Right
questioner?
here.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Ben Franklin made enormous contributions to America's efforts at that time. But would you tell us a little bit about his colorful social and personal life in France?
I don't know what you're referring to. Wow, thank you for that question. Yeah, Ben Franklin, let's say he sees his life by the collar for most of his 84 years. He's born in 1706. He dies in Philadelphia in 1790. He will spend, as I said, 90 months, about 8.5 years in Paris, doing the work of building the United States into an independent country. That diplomatic work consists firstly in securing France as a foreign ally, which he accomplishes in 1778, then holding France to that treaty, and then negotiating the Treaty of Paris after the war, and he goes home about 18 months after that. That's the headlines. But as you know, I think, he also really enjoys living in Paris. I should say before we go any further, he's a widower. His wife passes away in 1774, 3 years before he goes to Paris. So rumors, many of them true, about his romantic and sexual relations with French women. There's no whiff of Franklin infidelity. He's a widower. He can do what he wants, right? Whether those women can do what they want depends on how open their relationships are with their husbands at the time. But if you want, you can really entertain yourself by reading some of the surviving letters. You might call them love letters or flirtation letters between him and his primary sort of romantic partner, Madame Brion, Brillon, who is definitely married, and her husband knows and does not care because he's having an affair with 3 other people as well. There's a great book about Franklin and women, which gives you a lot more color than I'm comfortable doing in this mixed audience today. Thank you for the great question. Yeah.
Linda.
Okay, thank you for a wonderful presentation. It was fascinating. I was wondering if you could share with us the Polish contribution
Yeah.
during the revolution.
Yeah, so there are significant numbers of Polish people who will come from Poland to fight in this war. Thaddeus Troskusko and Kazimierz Pulaski, perhaps, are the two most famous people from Eastern Europe, often passing through France. So we could debate whether they're French or Polish, but I'm going to give them the Polish tip there. And they are part of a wave of out of work European military officers who volunteer to serve in George Washington's army. Now, as the word out of work suggests, some of them are doing it because they love the Patriots' cause, right? Lafayette, who's also basically out of work, does it because he loves the idea of self-governance. Many others, Baron Steuben from Prussia being a good example, do it for the paycheck. And that's fine too, right? Because the point is they contribute to the American army at the time when the American army is desperately in need of something that only European officers can provide, which is extraordinary experience and sophisticated training. So Pulaski and Kosciuszko, they're bringing expertise in cavalry and in engineering and artillery into an American army which doesn't have that expertise and is smart enough to know it badly needs that influx of expertise. So no surprise then that the Polish contribution, Poland has a really strong military tradition like Prussia, is one of the sort of kickstarters of the professionalization of the American army. One of the myths we've told ourselves over the years is that the American army wins by going native, hiding behind trees and taking pot shots at the British while they're all lined up in their stupid red uniforms. That's mostly a myth. It's about 10% true, 90% nonsense. Because what the Patriot Army is actually trying to do is to level up into a professional fighting force on the European model. That's why they're sweeping in European experts to help them level up and Europeanize. So that Polish expertise, when combined with Prussian expertise and French expertise, goes a long way. And Washington is smart enough to know that this is the path to actually engaging the British Army on the open battlefront. So the Polish contribution, essential. Yeah.
Denny, I think you're next.
You briefly outline the part British East India Company played in the revolution.
Yes, and I notice your name is Dinny Adams, which means I know your sister Sally Adams, and it's lovely to see you. You can't everyone know Sally Adams, I guess. The role of the British East India Company is fascinating, and it crops up in a couple of ways. I'll try and be brief here because I write 2 chapters at either end of the book, one about China and one about India, in which the East India Company figures prominently. So the East India Company is one of the drivers of the American Revolution. People reacting against the arrival of the East India Company in the American consumer market for tea is what brings on the Boston Tea Party in 1773. There are plenty of people in Boston who love tea, but they've been getting their tea from Dutch smugglers, and they do not welcome the arrival of a global conglomerate, the British East India Company, with a reputation for corruption and brutality. This is a global conglomerate that has destroyed parts of India, and people in Boston know that record. They know that record, and they do not want that company coming into their consumer market. Brings on the Boston Tea Party. We could also say that the East India Company its record will also resonate after the war. This company is so bloated and corrupt and mismanaged, especially in its Indian strongholds of Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta, that after the war, the British government is trying to hold on to the remaining colonies it has around the world. And it worries that the British East India Company, which is actually the one in control of Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta, is incapable of making good decisions. And so the British government sends out its troops and its commanders to forcibly take over this private company, the East India Company, and effectively British East India Company India then becomes British India, if you see the difference there. And guess who they task. But guess who the British government tasks with taking over the CEO job of the British East India Company in India after the war? I'll give you a clue. His first name is Lord, and his last name is Cornwallis. So Lord's not actually his first name, but you get the point, right? Lord Cornwallis, the guy who lost the Battle of Yorktown, gets a second chance, and he is sent to assert control over the crazy East India Company, and he does that very successfully. And once he finds his footing as the new British commander in India, he will set about extending Britain's footprint into other parts of India it's never controlled before. So the British East India Company is present at the start of the revolution in the Chinese tea context, and present at the end as the British Empire tries to rebuild and extend itself afterwards. Thanks for the question, Billy. Appreciate it.
Where's the question in about?
The next question here. Von Steuben, the Prussian.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit what he brought to the table?
Oh, he brought loads to the table. He was a captain in the most mighty and well-trained military anywhere in the world. That's the Prussian army. Prussia is a small place, but it is a mighty place, and it has the most professional, most fearsome army anywhere in Europe. He had built a career in the Prussian army, but gets fired from the Prussian army, most likely connected to a scandal involving the revelation that he's gay. And so he's kicked out of the Prussian army before the war and goes around Europe looking for jobs, right? Will you hire me? Will you hire me? Will you hire me? The French army says no thanks. The British East India Company army says no thanks. And Ben Franklin says, well, how about a job interview? And eventually, Franklin and Silas Deane, the other American envoy in Paris, hire him to be a volunteer officer to go to Valley Forge. And if he does a good job there, they'll try and get him paid. He's out of work. He's desperate for a paycheck. He's very happy to go. He arrives at Valley Forge in the spring of 1778. And George Washington, who is makes great judgments about other people. He's good at hiring smart people, sees what this out of work Prussian captain, who's a bit disgraced, brings to the table. And what he brings is the disciplinary regime and training of the greatest army in the world, the Prussian army. And Washington has the sense to put Steuben in charge of drilling and discipline at Valley Forge in the spring of 1778. And over about 6 weeks, he trains the hell out of the Continental Army, who had previously done all sorts of different types of drills. Some regiments had done French drills, because that's how they've been trained back in New York or Massachusetts. Others done German drills. Many had done English drills. He trains them all on a simplified version of the Prussian system and brings them together. So now they can all literally march in lockstep for the first time. They can all literally turn around at the same time. They can control when they're going to fire. They can reload more quickly. So the payoff of all this is partly that they're a more fearsome fighting force by the end, and they do better in battles like Monmouth as a result, but mostly it's about a sense of unit cohesion, which is what we call it today. 13 different states have sent 13 different armies, but Steuben wraps them all into one thing, the Continental Army, and puts them on the same page. And what that means is there's real pride in military service after Valley Forge in a way that honestly hadn't been before. So desertion rates drop after Steuben. There is stick-to-itiveness, resilience between battles as well as in battles, which hadn't been there before. So Steuben is a game changer. Thanks for the question.
Question. This thing on? It's not on.
It's on, just put it up to your lips, Phil.
Hello. This is.
Give him a different mic. That one doesn't seem to be what.
It's kind of working. It's a battery. I'll switch mics. Yeah, probably. Thank you. Excellent presentation. Thank you. One question and one comment. Question. How much of an influence was the American Revolution to the French Revolution? I haven't heard too much about. You need my question.
Stolen your question. I bet many people have that question, right? I love that question. Might be a good question maybe to wrap up with. I would like to hang out and talk privately with people with more questions. This is the age of revolutions. The American Revolution will be the first. There'll be the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution. There'll be a bunch of South American revolutions. They're all important. We could argue till the cows come home about which one is more important. The French think it's theirs. Yes. The Haitians think it's theirs. We think it's ours. We could argue about that. The connections between them are fascinating. I do not take the American-centric view that the American Revolution in 1776 causes the French Revolution in 1789. But I do think there is important connective tissue between the two. I think Lafayette is an example of some of that connective tissue. He's present at both. He's advocating for social change, political change in the French Revolution. But it's not true that every French soldier comes back from military service in America demanding revolution at home. That's just not true.
Okay, to correct, I think this is working to sort of, okay, I represent the evil Catholic friends.
Oh, you do? The evil Catholic France.
Yes.
Okay.
So yes, I agree with you. It did not cause the French Revolution. However, Louis XVI kindly gave money to the North American colonies he did not have. So this, allied with a number of other things, ended up with the fact that the French treasury was really, let's say, really in the red.
Yeah.
And this, it's not a direct correlation, but because of what had been done here, and because the movement that was here ultimately led to the French Revolution, but like jumping several steps in that.
Yeah, so I think you're onto something there, Elizabeth. The scholars of the French Revolution who I've read, many of them actually French who've done this research in the French archives, say the French Revolution has two big driving causes. One is agricultural repression, landlords treating their tenants like you know what, and tenants being sick and tired of it. And honestly, that has nothing to do with the American Revolution. The other cause is fiscal mismanagement. And this is the French government being in massive structural debt to finance global wars. But what we may not understand is that France had been doing that for decades. France had built itself in a pit of debt from fighting and losing the last war, the 7 Years' War. So it's certainly true that the American debts it takes on to fight the American war contribute to that debt and may or may not be the straw that broke the camel's back, but being in massive debt in France as a government is a pre-existing condition, actually, that goes back a long way. So historians argue about whether it's that last couple of million that make the difference or not. And it's a fair debate to have, I think.
All right, I think we need to end this portion of the Q&A to allow Rick to move over and take up residence at that table in the corner where he will sign your book if you've already purchased one. And if you wish to purchase one, you can do so there and he'll sign that one too. Let's give him a big hand.
Next slide. Closing slide.
Yeah, I'm sure.
All right, just before you leave, comment on, our next presentation is May 11th. And we're gonna talk about, the title is gonna be Legacy of the Skies, a grandson's tribute to, a legendary aviator. And, this is a fantastic story about, aviator goes from World War I, World War II into D-Day. So I hope you'll join us on Monday, May 11th. Thank you. Good night.